been a big season so far for West Ham. You've got Jarrod Bowen bagging goals once more. You've got Soufal chipping in with assists. Thomas Soucek before the Villa game was playing like a man possessed, a prime Yaya Toure, if you will. Don't at me, just my opinion. I want to know what's changed. How have we gone from being super ineffective in a lot of areas to super effective in those areas in the course of what felt like a pre-season that didn't even go super well? What are the small little tactical switches? What are the small little elements that have made this group of players work so much better than they were last season when, frankly, outside of our incredible European run, just weren't good enough? I'm not smart enough to figure out those things by myself. However, I know someone who is. Jack Elderton, co-founder of Analytics United, West Ham tactics writer. He writes in the programme. West Ham came to him and went, "You're really good, can you write for us in the programme?" That's how good he is. And, from a Hammers chat perspective, he also co-hosts Hamalytics over on our Patreon. So Jack, apart from my t-shirt in about 10 seconds time, what's changed?
Yeah, I think everything has improved dramatically. We talked in the first episode that we did on the main channel about how some of the shifts in the system had really allowed us to be a much more effective counter-attacking team. And it's still, at the next international break, it's the counter-attacking numbers that are flying through the roof at the moment. We're almost, I think, 2 out of 3 counter-attacks leading to a shot, which is crazy, crazy numbers. And compared to everything before, going back through Y-Scout data back to the 2015-16 season is way above anything we've ever recorded previously. And hopefully that can kind of show to people just how ridiculously effective we've been as a counter-attacking team so far this season. Intriguingly, also, our corners are up to their highest point, and similarly, our positional attacks are also up to their highest point. So actually, as an attacking force, we are much more efficient than we ever have been. Certainly since that 2015-16 Slaven Bilic season. It's a little bit of surprise, really, because I was expecting positional attacks to be really high in the 2015-16 Dimitri Payet season, but they're higher right now so far this season. We talked about small sample in the last episode. It's still kind of small, so we want to wait till we're halfway through the season, really, before we start talking about this being one of the best West Ham teams stepping into the Premier League this season. But not just system. I think a big part of what we're doing is much more effective implementation of classic David Moyes principles. And when we look back at how West Ham have functioned as a counter-attacking team, we can see very similar moves existing across many iterations of this West Ham team. And the most typical of those is the overloading to underload principle, using left-sided build-up, left-sided creation, left-sided progression, and left-sided retention in the final third, and then right-sided completion of those moves. So you're looking at players on the right-hand side like Soufal, Bowen, and Soucek, as you mentioned, as players that are going to provide either the final ball or the goal itself. So Soufal definitely an assister on the overlap, and Bowen coming inside. Soucek also box crashing as players that are going to get goals. And then the left side is more how we built up. Previously, it was Aaron Cresswell being someone that contributed a huge amount of passes in build up, and then we brought Emerson in, and it was much more. On paper, it would be much more using him as a carrier. That was very close, rather than a passer. But one of the really interesting things that has shifted is obviously that Lucas Paqueta has moved to the left side of midfield, which is a big difference from maybe the first few games of the season where Saïd Benrahma was still the first choice left winger. And there have been multiple knock-on effects of Lucas Paqueta moving to the left, but the most dramatic of these has probably been Bowen and Soufal just flying back up into really creative and goal-scoring figures. But perhaps more interestingly, defensively or deeper in build-up, it's the relationship that he has with Emerson. And when you look at the passes between the left back and left midfielder so far this season, you can really see the difference when Lucas Paqueta came into the team on the left-hand side, and just how much that is pulling defenders across to that side of the pitch and enabling then that greater form from Bowen, from Soufal, and also to some extent from Thomas Soucek as well. And one of the words that we can use to kind of summarize this is gravity. Lucas Paqueta, a perfect example of this actually, is in the recent Europa League game against Freiburg, is very, very, very good at drawing defenders to him, using his excellent upper body strength to hold players off. And when he's drawn in several players into his sort of orbit, that's when he'll release the ball. And you see in that move just a perfect example of that classic West Ham counter where the ball advances up the left side of the pitch. Bowen steps inside off of his right flank into the space that's then exposed and runs through. And there's a pass that goes through into that space. And this time it's Paqueta that actually plays it, which shows just how good he is at combining both elements that we previously saw in these moves, the hold up and actually the creative action of playing the defense splitting pass. And that's getting Bowen back into those positions. If we look back at how that functioned previously, it was maybe more so with Mikel Antonio as a player that could really occupy multiple defenders whilst being a goal threat himself. And that obviously the fact that he was more of a goal threat previously than he has been so far this season sort of enabled him to occupy more defenders because he was such a threat in multiple senses, not just as a hold-up player, someone that brought other people into the game, but actually as someone that could spin down the left side and create chances for himself. And often it was his relationship with Pablo Fornals that functioned so well when Pablo Fornals was either playing on the left or as a 10. I mean, whichever way you look at it, the left-sided player often at West Ham isn't really a true winger. They're someone that steps inside off the flank and plays in more central zones anyway. And you can see this move happening several times really throughout Moyes' period. I think I gave you several examples to put in the video. One was all the way back in the Chelsea game when we were fighting to stay in the league, and it's Yarmolenko that completes the move starting on the right hand side. Antonio holds up, plays it back, gets the ball back, spins and plays it into the space on the right hand side of the pitch. We can then advance that on to Leon, which is another really good example of that move. Antonio to the left side of the pitch, pulls lots of defenders across, plays back to Fornals. Fornals hits the space for Bowen, and Bowen runs through and scores. And yeah, we can bring that now to the present with Paqueta now fulfilling more of that kind of hold the ball up, draw people in, and then play through to that space for Bowen in that Freiburg example. And I think part of the reason that he's very useful on that left side is not just that build-up, like we said, but also because Antonio is maybe slightly less impactful on games now, still an incredibly useful platform provider for us. He's giving that additional help to refocus and make sure that we are overloading that side of the pitch. And that's what's creating all of that space out on the other side. Another example being in the Liverpool game, where you see Paqueta receiving the ball actually deeper on the left side of the pitch and a huge amount of space opening on the right-hand side. And this time it's Soufal flying up the wing. Bowen actually steps inside, as he usually does, heads the ball down to Antonio. Antonio takes on that sort of almost typical Fornals back in the day pass of the ball out to the underloaded right flank, and Soufal's able to cross. And it's Bowen that gets his head on the ball and gets us the equaliser in that game. So a classic West Ham and a classic David Moyes move that we've really seen back in impressive style this season. And Lucas Paqueta's move to the left side of the pitch has really been an important part of functionalising that, and making it easy for us to be quite so efficient so far this season.
What's interesting to me about moving Paquetá to the left and him being so effective there, and we've touched on this sort of briefly when we did Hamalytics on the Patreon, is I saw Paquetá for years before he joined West Ham. I've always loved him as a footballer, watching him play. But notably, whenever I saw him playing on the left, be it for Lyon or AC Milan, it just didn't work. It just never clicked properly. It just never really felt like a thing. And then all of a sudden we do it, and bang, it works. Similarly, a little bit seeing Pablo Fornals before he moved here. Whenever I'd see him play on the left before he joined us, I was like, this is not the one. And then when he's in the 10 position, I'm like, oh, look at him go. He's finding these passes. He's all beautiful. Somehow the exact same things happened again, where he got moved to the left, all of a sudden it worked. Paquetá got moved to the left, all of a sudden it worked.
Yeah, well, I think in some ways that can really show just how much we use the left-sided players, particularly in the two examples you give, as players in possession that do really step outside of those zones and don't necessarily operate as touchline wingers, for example. And I think something that's really helped Paquetá this season is, though nominally he is starting on the left side of the pitch in possession, we largely see him playing what you could almost describe as a free role, where he can come deep and receive in almost the sixth position. And then we also see him receiving sort of deep left and playing those 1-2s with Emerson. It's been such a fantastic relationship, because if you look at how it functioned previously with Cresswell, it was very much sort of Cresswell's classic sort of progressive move for us was the kind of whipped ball, off the left peg up the flank, which Antonio would be making that run to the left side, drawing the centre back across. He would be able to chest the ball down, draw the centre back in nice and tight to his back, and then play the ball back inside to Fornals, who would be coming in from the left flank into central positions. Now what we're seeing actually is that this is augmented now with Emerson playing the left back role, where you've got the combination of two things. One that I certainly at Manchester United we didn't sort of anticipate him having to the degree that he's shown so far this season, and I think a big part of it is that sort of socio-affective relationship he's got with Lucas Paqueta. They're clearly really good friends, clearly have a really good relationship with each other off the pitch as well as on the pitch, and that's that he's actually bringing that close control and passing in combination with his ability to go beyond and carry the ball as well. So instead of it being this, it almost looks wooden to reflect on that old Cresswell Antonio Fornals combination. When now what we're seeing is 1-2. Emerson into Paqueta. Paqueta draws a player, then plays a back heel through to Emerson. Emerson carries the ball up the left, probably plays it back to Paqueta again. Paqueta just does exactly the same thing again, drawing someone in, and then releases Emerson on a second pass. And it's often then Emerson who's driving more central. Antonio will go out to the left side, again pulling defenders across, and then there's that space on the right side for Bowen, who can pull his fullback in and be an option attacking the box, and then simultaneously obviously create that space for Sufal to make an unopposed run up the right flank where he hasn't really got any defenders to contend with. So yeah, although they're playing as wingers, a lot of the time they don't function as wingers, and we're seeing that taken one step further with Lucas Paqueta than it was with Pablo Fornals, largely because of Paqueta's greater ability as not just creatively but also in terms of his retention. Fornals comparatively was very good at playing defense splitting passes or passes that really pushed us forward nice and quickly. He's fantastic at releasing into space, but if we're reflecting on last season a little bit, at times is maybe an understatement, it came at too great a cost to actual retention of the ball because he was too eager to play first or second touch into the space, whereas Paqueta does really allow us to, sometimes if you're defending deeper, having Paqueta in the team as the initial release player, the fact that he takes quite so long and probably drives Moyes a little bit mad, drawing players in and being quite slow in that initial receiving phase, actually gives the time, if we're deeper on the pitch, for someone like Jarrod Bowen to get really nice and high up the pitch, and Sufal to make his run as well, and Souček to get forward as well. Whereas previously Fornals might have been releasing before we've really been able to break free of our defensive structure and get enough support up to Antonio.
And Souček's the one that I was going to pick out mostly as well, just because we've seen in the last couple of games how high up the pitch he's getting. And it's not even just the case of, oh, we're going to start attacking, he's going to get up there. My man is pushing the back line super far back, and all of a sudden you're just seeing so much space for players that we just haven't seen previously. We spoke a lot on this channel years ago when Payet was here about the relationship between him and Lanzini, in terms of Payet was so good and so mercurial that teams felt the need to put 2, sometimes 3 players on him, and all of a sudden you're just giving space to someone like Manuel Lanzini to go, right, fine, I'll just run the pitch as well. Like, A, you're not going to be able to stop Dimitri Payet because he's Dimitri Payet, but B, give the space to Lanzini, he can do all these other things. What you're saying about Paqueta and him drawing people in, and his ability, like you say, with his back to goal, receiving deep, he's just going to absorb all the pressure, do some incredible pirouette, and then just walk away with the ball or pass it as if nothing's ever happened, giving space to Bowen and people like that. But also Thomas Souček pushing so far forward is something we miss so often. There's so many games over the last however many years, forever almost, where I'm like, just get someone on the pitch to just push the defenders back. That's all we need him to do. Just push the defenders back. It's a big problem when Danny Ings is on the pitch because he wants to get involved. He's dropping deep to try and get involved, all this other stuff. I just want someone sometimes to just push the defense back, give the people space. And Thomas Souček bombing forward like an absolute madman, not only getting goals, but creating so much space in the process, even if he's not the one who's getting on the end of it. Just an insane amount of space, and you can see what it's doing for the players we've got on the pitch, but you can also only imagine what it's going to do when Kudus becomes someone who may be starting alongside Thomas Souček in some formation. Don't know how, but you could see exactly how much space it's going to generate for someone like him, who does enjoy the ball in those central areas, who can pick up the ball and just go into those areas and just cause havoc. It's a big plus point.
Yeah, well, I mean, Suchek, it's great to see him performing to a high level again, and it's sort of vindication for the idea that he's not really a defensive
Yeah.
midfielder. He is someone that is so much better as a box to box midfielder, someone that can be really impactful in both boxes and presents a huge box threat going forward, which, like you say, creates space for other players. It's interesting that you mentioned the sort of Payet Lanzini dynamic, because I think with Paqueta on the left side of the pitch, there is potential going forward throughout the rest of the season to not replicate that, but imitate that somewhat, with Paqueta and Kudus, who is such a dynamic player at 10. And if you think what Lanzini was like at that time before his injury, he was a really dynamic, threatening player running through the center of the pitch. And Kudus combines that actually with, he's a really, really exceptional sort of finisher. And that doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily mean he finishes all of his chances, but I always feel like when I watch Kudus footage, sometimes I'm watching a game and I'm thinking, an old Ajax game, I'm like, he's not playing brilliantly. And then he scores out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like such an upside player. So if you're thinking about someone, like you say, who can exploit the spaces created by Paqueta moving to the left side of the pitch and drawing people in, whether it's Thomas Souček on the pitch pushing the defense back, or Antonio doing his job, which is largely now, I would say, about moving opposition defenders around and creating space for other players, because maybe he doesn't have quite the same athleticism to do that and then attack the second phase himself and be a genuine goal threat in every game and every minute of every game. I think we're seeing him as more of a 1 hour player who provides us a platform, and enables other players to play very well. Yeah, I think Kudus is someone that could really exploit those spaces and present huge upside for us. Honestly, I mean, I think I've said this elsewhere, but I think what we're looking at right now, still very early in the season, is a West Ham team that is functioning to a higher level than the West Ham team that got to the semi-final of the Europa League. Um, a better iteration of that team, playing a somewhat similar brand, somewhat similar, very similar with a few alterations that we're talking about here, approach to the game. But then what I also think with Kudus in the squad is that we can go back to something that we were doing so effectively with Jesse Lingard, with more of a dynamic 10, and a 9-10 relationship that looks more to create verticality and options through the middle of the pitch. Something that I think could dovetail brilliantly with what we're doing in terms of the overloading of the left flank with Paqueta. And actually, just come to think of it, one of the things that can sum this up, I'll send you the graphics so that you can include them in the video, after we finish, is just the share of contributors so far this season. So I'm one game behind on the graphic. I haven't included the Newcastle game, but if you compare to last season, how limited the share was in terms of actual contributors, as goal threat. This season, it's completely different. You've got Bowen. Antonio's kind of constant, really, and then you've got Bowen flying back up into someone who is a serious goal threat, but also Thomas Souček and Soufal getting assists. So all of the things that we've talked about in this episode being enabled by some tweaks here and there, and actually, it's worth saying, really improved individual performance levels. It's not like we just tweak things and that's totally enabled people to be so much better. It's worth saying Emerson's actually just playing a hell of a lot better than he was last season.
Yeah.
Soufal is playing a hell of a lot better than he was last season, just on their individual sort of merit of performance. We're seeing just a much greater share across the pitch, which helps us be a much more effective team.
So there we go. I mean, big vibes at the moment. I'm still incredibly happy. I'm enjoying the fact that both times we've done this show, which hasn't been the case in other shows we've done together, like Hamalytics, like the West Ham Breakdown, for example. I'm enjoying the fact that both times we've done this show in the big public manner as opposed to hidden away on the Patreon. I could be incredibly positive about everything that's happening. I dread the next time we do it if it's gone poorly. I'm sure the information in there will still be great, but I am scared of the vibes. Right now, Jack, the vibes are immaculate, and long may that last. Let the people know where they can find you, the West Ham Breakdown, analyticsunited.co.uk, all that good stuff.
Well, I think you've just done it. Analyticsunited.co.uk /members if you want to support my work and Cal's work as well. If you want to listen to me and Cal break down the tactics and the data behind West Ham games every single week, then you can catch us on the West Ham Breakdown feed on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. And then you can find us on Twitter as well. You can find me on Twitter at Jack Alderton. And I have just posted on there my most recent piece, which is looking at the Newcastle game and how a second half change around the way that we defended, and also the way that Eddie Howe utilised Dan Burn as a box crusher a la Thomas Souček. All the things we're talking about created space actually to free up Kieran Trippier on the right-hand side and allowed them to create chances. So similar to the overload to underload principles we've been talking about in this video, but looking at how they worked very well for a team that we came up against most recently.
Myself and Jack will be back on the Patreon next week with a Q&A. So if you're on a Patreon, make sure to reply to that post. But publicly, we'll be back next month at some point. But until then, come you irons. Thanks everyone for watching and enjoy yourself. See you later, everyone. Bye. See ya.